Matt Kibbe, welcome to Dad Saves America.
It is so cool to do this. I love this format and digging a little bit deeper. So I'm honored to be here.
Oh, well, you and I have known each other a long time. I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, but I think it was when you were at FreedomWorks.
Yeah.
So
your beard was black.
I didn't have a beard. But I did have long sideburns, and they were indeed black.
Yeah. So a while, perhaps.
So we're now the gray beards.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to go back to that. So let's just start with what FreedomWorks was, and how did you first get into this world of policy and politics?
So it actually goes all the way back to my graduate studies at George Mason University. And we were reading a lot of the leftist literature on grassroots organizing, cadre building, how to take over a town hall meeting, all of that stuff. And
is Saul Alinsky part of that?
Like Saul Alinsky's part of it, but there's a whole literature that thinks a lot about how to essentially manipulate public opinion. And if you read Saul Alinsky, it's horribly cynical because it's like, and he actually dedicates his book to Lucifer, as you might recall.
I've only
unironically,
I've only read bits and pieces of Alinsky. I need to actually read the whole thing.
But as Saul Alinsky, the Rules for Radicals is really a series of tactics designed to get people to think something that they wouldn't naturally think. And
great.
And we so very cynical, very manipulative. But there's a certain truth in that. That politicians and political actors and even voters, they never ever have perfect knowledge. Humans never have perfect knowledge, and it's not a flaw. You're not a low information voter. You just you're living your life, and it's almost rational not to pay attention at all. So the question was, how would we actually organize people around liberty and limited government and fiscal responsibility and, very radical concepts, right?
Right.
And maybe we should balance the budget. I don't know. A monstrous idea.
Don't drive the ship of state off of a cliff, to mix metaphors.
Yeah. So fast forward to FreedomWorks was the organization that I founded. But again, based on this literature of grassroots organizing, could we create a constituency of people that would show up and advocate for liberty? We were doing that long before there was a Tea Party movement, but we were actually studying the Tea Party as a model for mostly peaceful social change. I'm obviously fascinated with American history and the miracle of the founding and where these ideas came from. A lot of people think it was sort of this immaculate conception of these very wise men who had read the right books, suddenly said, let's do the liberty thing. But it was an ethos. The spirit of 76 was very much a grassroots movement. I think it was John Adams that, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he famously said, at the time we were doing this, one third of the country was pro-liberty, patriots. 1/3 of the country was in the tank with the British. And then there was a third of the country that, where am I? What do I think?
Yeah.
And it was their job to move opinion in their direction. So in a lot of ways, this was the model that we were working on at FreedomWorks. And suddenly this thing called social media came along. And we were very lonely in opposing the Wall Street bailout in 2008. Mm-hmm. I thought it was just like, we're going to fight this. Not only are we going to lose, but nobody's going to be with us. Kind of like a sacrificial lamb. Let's do this because we have to, but there's no way we're going to stop this. And we're sending out all these missives on very primitive social media. And there was such a wave of people. I'm like, what's happening? It used to be hard to get people to show up. It used to be like this physical activity. Like you have to convince someone to get on a bus and come to Washington, D.C. to do something. That's it's almost irrational. It's such an investment of time and energy. And suddenly there was this wave of anger and calls that actually shut down Capitol Hill. I'm like, okay, that's a paradigm shift. There's something different going on. It was almost like a market, right? Spontaneously self-organizing, people coming together, all galvanized by the Wall Street bailout. Almost to a person, they would quote George W. Bush saying, we have to abandon the free market to save it. I'm like, how did you guys even hear him say that? It's because this insider game had suddenly become radically democratized. And they knew what the Wall Street bailout was, and they stopped the first House vote. And then Boehner and Pelosi sort of colluded to do it around their backs, and eventually they went to the Treasury Department and did it anyway.
That's right. It's easy to forget that at the time in the fall of 2008, the first bill to bail out the banks failed in the House.
Yeah.
All right, here's your obligatory reminder to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It really actually does help us out a lot. When we're trying to book awesome new guests, they look at how many subscribers are on the channel and they say, yep, this is worth doing. And I want to bring the best possible people to you that I can. Speaking of which, let's get back to the conversation.
I mean, they sort of knew what the Tea Party was, but they didn't appreciate that they were actually embracing an entire model of social change founded in sort of the American ethos of 76. So it was a beautiful thing. The others, once you asked them why they were there, you would ask them what they want. And again, like no talking points, no scripts, but to a person, they would say individual freedom, some version of this, individual freedom, constitutionally limited government, and fiscal responsibility. Super radical, dangerous ideas, right? And by the way, the Tea Party wasn't the first social movement that sort of started to scare the machine, the establishment. Part of it was you could go back to Howard Dean, but you could certainly look at the Ron Paul movement as no one expected that to happen. But he used the cultural soapbox, a presidential campaign, to plant seeds like Ludwig von Mises. Who's this guy?
And specifically, there was a moment in the presidential debates where, I mean, this was fairly radical. Ron Paul was talking about how 9/11 was a version of blowback for the CIA messing around, and for American interventionism overseas. And Rudy Giuliani was like, "How dare you? Take that back," because he was, America's mayor. And I mean, I was in New York for 9/11, so I wasn't necessarily predisposed to like what Ron Paul was saying at that time. It was a
little shocking. If you go back and watch that clip, Ron Paul gets booed wildly because the GOP, the part of the duopoly, had filled the room with their guys, like GOP donors, and they were like as offended as Rudy Giuliani was. But outside that room, the exact opposite happened.
Right.
And this again is early on, but and he used a old school tactic to get into a presidential primary debate and to be on TV. But it was social media that propelled the Ron Paul movement. It would have died on the vine because they would have choked him off. They would have said, okay, we're going to come up with a rule that doesn't let you come on and do these debates because we're not having that kind of subversive talk. This is our party. So you had all these things happening.
Yeah.
And we can fast forward today, and I'm still optimistic that someday, despite the absurdity of our political choices apparently that we'll have, you have all of these insurgents, and not just third parties, but you have, the Ron Pauls in the Republican Party. You have the Tulsi Gabbards in the Democratic Party. They did the same thing to her.
Yeah.
The Democrats did the same thing to her that the Republicans did to Ron Paul. And so you have these minority voices, these dissident voices that are very much empowered by technology. And the Tea Party just wouldn't have happened without that technology. And the machine, the people that started demonizing them, put 1 million people on the mall, and everybody's like, oh, what is this? We better do something about this. So they started trying to figure out who to take out.
And who's they? When you say they, who are you referring to? That's a shorthand.
Some of my friends call it the blob. I call it the machine, but it's the ecosystem of power mongers that feed off of big government. And obviously senators and congressmen, the lobby class, the corporate class, we now call it the deep state, but like the administrative state is a real thing.
Yeah.
There's,
is there like 1 million non-military executive branch employees, all of whom have a stake in this, in their budget growing.
There's a reason why Arlington County is one of the wealthiest counties in the world.
It is literally like the Hunger Games. Yeah, that's right. The counties surrounding Washington, D.C. are the richest counties in America.
Yeah.
How that isn't enough to generate pitchforks is beyond me. It's Pan Am.
Yeah. I mean, if we ever do build a wall, they're going to build a wall around themselves.
To keep the rest of us out.
And they'll probably develop sort of a Hunger Games sort of motif because it's kind of cool. But it at first, and it shifted precipitously, but at first it was the Democratic machine trying to stop us. Because at this point, you're seeing like real political potential in all of these people because they've started organizing in districts. Again, spontaneously. Nobody did this. You can't actually tell someone to knock on doors. It's something that they actually have to want to do. And if you actually want to have a tremendous impact, it needs to be decentralized. But the Democrats, so you have Democratic senators, you have Obama very publicly demonizing us. Organizing for Obama actually called us domestic terrorists.
It sounds familiar.
All of these.
Now they just call parents domestic terrorists.
Right. All of these themes were. I'm sure we weren't the first, but racist, domestic terrorist, Nazis, and we're called not like Nancy Pelosi has called us Nazis because someone had taken a picture of Barack Obama and put the little mustache on it. I'm like. Maybe you think that's tasteless, but that doesn't make us Nazis.
Right.
I didn't get it, but they're
it's
grabbing.
Like you're criticizing Nazism, and maybe you're being outrageous, but you're not saying you like. It's like, does that mean they're a fan of both the Nazis and Obama? I'm lost.
Yeah. So it started with the Democrats being panicked, but the thing that shifted, the Democrats were scared to death, but we weren't really interested in the Democrats. We had a slogan at the time, which was, you have to beat the Republicans before you can beat the Democrats. We had T-shirts. They were very popular, unless you happen to be an incumbent Republican. And they didn't like him that much at all. But, Mike Lee was the tip of the spear.
And then Thomas Massey is another amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not big on politicians in general, but there's a handful. Thomas Massey's in that category. I'm like, no, this is like a good person with actual principles and sticks to them.
Tea Party wave, Justin Amash, and people forget this too, but Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell did everything he could to stop Rand Paul from getting the Republican nomination in Kentucky.
Yes.
And he handpicked his guy, and Rand crushed him. And so at this point, we're starting to piss off some really powerful people in the Republican Party. So I think that our real enemies were the machine in the Republican Party. We went after Lindsey Graham. So we're trying, we were just trying to replace them with fiscally responsible, liberty-loving people, but we were actually taking on the war machine. And I didn't think about it that way. But man, we pissed off some important people. So it was fun. But the ultimate demise of the Tea Party around 13, 14, 15 was when Republicans, including some of the guys we helped get elected, broke the caps on spending. Remember, there were spending caps that the Tea Party forced.
Yeah, it was called the sequester, if I remember. Yes.
And no one thought we'd pull that off, but we created enough pressure to do that. It was Republicans that broke the caps because the defense, they weren't even cuts. There were limits on the growth of spending. It was intolerable to them. So that's your Achilles heel. If you're a fiscal conservative and you don't care about these endless wars, you're never going to get there. Thomas Massey gets a lot of crap for opposing foreign aid across the board. Mm-hmm. He gets accused of all sorts of horrible things because he's not wanting to spend money we don't have to send to other countries so that people can die in wars. It doesn't seem radical to me, his position, but in Washington, D.C., the machine, the people that went after the Tea Party, that's kryptonite, right? Like, that guy's got to go.
It is funny because there's the left-right concept, which began in like the French legislature, like, oh, who was pro-monarchy, was they were on the right and the revolutionaries were on the left or something like that. It doesn't really feel like that has a lot of explanatory or even utility, explanatory power or utility today. Because when I watch, like, say, Jimmy Dore on YouTube, who would call himself a man of the left, I have more in common with Jimmy Dore than a lot of people who would say who would maybe think they're with me.
Yeah.
And I think he's encountered that. And you have this meme, right? Which now, like, everything to the right of Lenin is far right. Like,
right.
if you're either Lenin, you're far right.
Yeah, Elon loves to tweet that out. That little meme.
Yeah, there's that stick figure with the person on the right, the person that's on the left, and then the far left, and the far left keeps moving to the point where, like, the person that was on the left is now like, what? I guess I'm on the right now.
It's kind of funny. Like, and I want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm a huge fan of some of my greatest critics. When I was a Tea Party organizer, Matt Kibbe was writing hit pieces on us and the Tea Party. Guy. He's awesome. Like, I have so much more in common with him than almost any Republican on Capitol Hill. And even Bill Maher, who at least 80% of the time I'm agreeing with the guy. And every time I used to go on, I think every time, he always started off with, "You're just mad because there's a black man in the White House."
I remember these media hits with you on that show. And it was always like, this is such a despicable line, Bill. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Especially if he knew anything about
I'd love to ask him, because I think he's now like, we created a monster. And I think he's rediscovering his liberal roots. And I use that word because I think Jimmy Dore, Bill Maher, Dave Chappelle, Russell Brand, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, Matt Kibbe.
Yeah. But by the way, well, Matt's different, but all these other guys are comedians. So when you say you're not allowed to say something to a comedian, they suddenly realize that the left that they thought was liberal isn't liberal at all. It's authoritarian. It's very
illiberal.
It's very dour too. It's very scoldy. It's like a new religion, but not as fun as the old religion. And so they're coming along, and I think there's an exciting. I think the pandemic, the lockdowns, the censorship industrial complex is the new Wall Street bailout, and there's a new political coalition emerging that is in a lot of ways coming from these guys you're talking about.
Yeah.
Lefties who the left left them. So there's an anti-authoritarian coalition that I think is quite exciting, where Thomas Massie and Matt Taibbi and Rand Paul and Jimmy Dore, they're working on the things that matter. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had Brett Weinstein and Heather Hang on the show, and they're in that category as well.
They're almost OG, right? Like the first lefties to be canceled that, like, who are these people?
Right. To be hunted by zombies at Evergreen. So that is a great segue, which is to say that, so you were in the trenches inside this world of political activism, which is not, you were in DC, you were working for a congressman, you are leading an organization that's getting attacked by all kinds of people who basically have, like, I watch cable news and I know you're bad because a host on cable news said you're bad. And that's all I know. I don't know anything about it. You're some dark money thing or something, all these buzzwords.
By the way, Keith Olbermann called me the second worst person in the world. And that is still on my bio because I'm sort of proud of that one.
Who was the first? Hitler, I guess? Is it Hitler?
It was Rupert Murdoch. So I wasn't,
not even Hitler.
I wasn't even going to get that spot.
So how should someone that hears about these machinations, including organizations like FreedomWorks, and just thinks this all sounds like you're messing around with our democratic process, and I don't have a seat at that table. So maybe you had debt or whatever, but it still all sounds like you're doing machinations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is something that I want to be sensitive to, because I think there's like a kind of, you get into this world of talking about politics, and before you know it, you're in an industry.
Mm-hmm.
And you come to conferences and you see all the same people,
right.
we do.
Yeah.
And you're in an industry now. So how would you explain the role of this activity as something that shouldn't always be considered suspect or corrupt?
Yeah. I mean, it's a complex question, because you and I would also say on occasion, if we're looking at some sort of behavior coming out of Washington or some organization, you always say, follow the money.
Well, like a good example, Black Lives Matter. I think you and I would both look at Black Lives Matter as an organization. And I've had people like Wilfred Riley on the show be like, that's just a corrupt. Mm-hmm. They took in money, millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's a grift.
And funneled it to themselves and to totally unrelated causes, trans rights things and international weird stuff. And it's a grift. It's a scam.
Yeah.
So knowing whether Black Lives Matter is or isn't a scam, or Freedom Works is or isn't a scam, is pretty hard.
Yeah. You have to do, if you're talking about being a donor or a journalist, you have to do your due diligence. Too many reporters don't actually do almost no reporters do any work anymore. So if you wanted to look at, my little organization right now, Free the People, you would have to determine whether or not the things we do are authentic. Am I being paid for? Am I advocating certain positions simply because there's money in it? You'd be hard pressed to look at my organization and come to that conclusion, because there's honestly not a huge financial constituency for what I would consider pretty pure philosophical libertarianism. But I think it kind of goes back to the Ron Paul thing. I think you look at the people and you look at the organization and judge for yourself. Are they authentically doing what they believe? Are they trying to make a difference? Are they effective? But in that order, are they good people? Do they believe what they say they believe? Are they effective? Because, some really bad people can be quite effective at doing bad things.
Machiavelli.
And I think it's it's a burden for anybody that runs an organization. You have to protect the integrity of that, which is why we don't take corporate money. Some of my friends who do liberty organizations, you can tell when it's corporate funded, because it sounds like a corporate talking point. And I think that leads them exposed. I'm not saying they're violating their principles. I'm not saying that they're doing something wrong, but it leaves them exposed to this assumption from their enemies in particular, or even like people just trying to figure out what do I think on this subject? What do I think about global warming? Does that sound like Exxon talking points? Well, that doesn't persuade me. It might actually push me in the opposite direction.
There's an Upton Sinclair quote that I come back to fairly often, have since committing myself to trying to align my personal values with my work. And that is, and I'll paraphrase, the man the man will not be made to understand something that his paycheck depends on him not understanding. There is a feedback loop that is difficult, especially if you're going down a road and you've brought people along with you and you come to a point where you actually honestly change your mind. You say, I thought I believed this, but I have now come to believe something different.
Yeah.
And now you're at a crossroads where you've brought all these people along, and even your payroll, your livelihood now rests on a choice. How have you, as someone who's driven by your philosophy and your ethics and built your business around it, how have you grappled with that temptation, if you will?
Yeah, we had a very specific moment. So Free the People was founded in 2015. really got going in 2016, and the idea, it was almost like a transpartisan idea that we're gonna bridge the divide, and we're gonna talk to people across the political spectrum, because I don't think libertarian is like right or left. I think it's up or down, basically. And authoritarianism is on the bottom. The most horrific, blood-soaked flavors of that are at the bottom. And as you get up, you get towards voluntary, cooperative, mutual respect. Things that your mom taught you, right?
Yeah. So being a good neighbor, treating other people the way you would like to be treated, or the way perhaps that they would like to be treated.
Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff.
Yeah.
And that was our idea, and we were very much, we're producing video content to reach young people, and telling emotionally compelling stories. We did one film on restorative justice that had beautiful sort of transpartisan reach, from the evangelical left to very progressive activists. And then the lockdowns hit, and we stopped almost everything. And like, I was literally sitting on a beach in the British Virgin Islands in early March, with my laptop, writing an article about how catastrophic it would be if we actually locked down the world. Because there was a hashtag, maybe you have to bleep this out. I know this is called Dads Save America, but you remember the hashtag Stay the F Home? I took it literally, and I thought to myself, what if everybody stayed home? People will die, particularly people at the margins, particularly people that don't have any wiggle room in their lives, and particularly in countries that are not as rich as the United States. If you actually shut down the world, you're not going to disrupt the supply chain, you're going to break it. And so I wrote this piece long before supply chains were in the public vernacular, quoting Bastiat on how Paris gets fed. And I was just thinking about this, and I'm getting really angry about it, because, within a couple days, they did. We didn't even know if we'd get home. So we left the beach early, got home, because Trump was saying, I'm gonna shut down the airlines. And God knows what he's going to say the next day.
Yeah, we were in New York City in early March, filming with Jonathan Haidt for a documentary that's the predecessor to this show, about what's happened to our kids and their mental health. And it was like, the news was real time. It's like, Uber driver tests positive. We were like, oh my God, are we going to are we going to get home? Are they going to like down all the airplanes? Like, what's happening?
Yeah. So I got home. We got home, and we got my entire team on. I don't think we even did Zoom back then, did we? I don't think it was even a thing. I don't remember, but we got together and said, okay, we're going to stop everything we're doing, and we need to talk about this. And we need to explain to people that the basic economics, the link between economic prosperity and human health, the fact that if you're not getting a meal, you really have really important things to worry about that are not whatever this thing is. And we don't know what this is. We don't know how dangerous it is. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not even thinking about that stuff at the time. I'm just thinking about economics. So we shifted gears completely. And this goes back to your earlier point. I sent out a fundraising letter. I thought that, particularly in the context of the Wall Street bailout, that we would get a lot of support from our donors. I think it was basically crickets. I didn't hear anything back. I actually heard back from, I just met with one of our supporters who actually emailed me back at the time and scolded me, said, you don't understand how dangerous this is. So I was sideways, or at least like my supporters were not really interested in what I was interested in, but we did it anyway. And honestly, they've come around. Everybody's come around, and particularly the people that sort of fell for the demagoguery of Fauci et al. Like, they feel betrayed, they feel lied to, they feel angry about what happened. But it was something we decided to do because not enough people were doing it. Like, we were talking about the Beltway think tank class.
Yeah. No.
Crickets. Nothing. So it was like the Wall Street bailout all over. It's like, okay, we'll do it. And, I'm proud of the work we did. We did one documentary about a father in Brooklyn who's trying to save his family restaurant.
I remember this documentary, yeah.
And in the middle of trying to save his restaurant, his son develops a health problem, seizures. And remember, Cuomo and the mayor said, because they're health experts, right? They know how to manage hospital flow. They said, we're going to prioritize COVID. So if you have something else, you can't come to the hospital. His son dies. It's a devastating story. But we don't pick on Cuomo. We don't pick on lockdown orders. We just tell this story of this guy. And it was a way for people to humanize Bastiat's story.
Yeah, the unseen.
Yeah, I didn't quote Bastiat. I just told a story. Yeah. Terry always yells at me because I love to quote dead economists.
No. We're in the same boat of being super nerds. And it's like, so for those who aren't familiar with Bastiat, one of his famous ideas, well, you explain.
Well, I'm thinking of the seen and unseen. There's a lot of important Bastiat stories, and he has this essay in Economic Sophisms called, I don't know if it's called this, but he asks the question, how is Paris fed? And it's about this magic that happens where, for reasons that nobody understands, when people wake up in the morning, there's bread, there's food, there's everything you need is there. And they have no idea where it came from. And that's the seen part. It's just basically assume that bread's there. We'll be fed. It'll be fine. And then they start tinkering with that. It's like, well, maybe we should tax bread or regulate bread or make it more equitable, whatever they're doing.
Yep.
And they don't appreciate the incredibly complex web of voluntary activity and special skills and distributed labor that led to that magic of Paris being fed. And, it sort of portends most of Hayek, right? Like trying to explain the market process to people. And that was like, starting with Trump, like I think he actually said, well, I can shut it off, but then I'll just turn it back on.
Look, this is this thing that these analogies and the words we use matter so profoundly in how they shape our thinking. And to some extent, I would even say that the sort of postmodernists have a point about the power of words, because stimulus, the car metaphor of the economy, that there's an engine and it can stall and it needs a jump start. It's like, there's no engine.
Yeah.
There's no starter. That is like an analogy.
Ross Perot wanted to lift the hood, right?
It's like that is an analogy that suggests a bunch of things that are not true. That suggests that there's a fixed mechanical machine with gears that fit in a particular way, and that there's a mechanic that just needs to know how the machine works. It can go in and be like, oh, this pneumatic tube got loose. Now we've got the circular flow back. None of that's true. The closest analogy, if you're going to use one, is the rainforest and an ecosystem with animals and plants and living things that are all in constant dynamic reaction to each other. And if you think, oh, we don't have enough wolves, let's bring back more wolves, you're going to fundamentally disrupt every single thing. It's chaos theory.
Yeah. Random tangent. We had a beautiful interview with Yotuel, who's a Cuban dissident musician who co-wrote the protest song Patria Vida that created those massive protests in Cuba, and so many kids got jailed and horrible things happened. But it was a music that galvanized the world. And when we interviewed him, he used the forest metaphor for explaining capitalism. And he probably hasn't read Mises. I don't know, but he's like, imagine a forest that's just banana trees. And he just goes on and on explaining the beautiful complexity of this ecosystem. And I'm like, dude, we need more musicians explaining capitalism because we're not doing it. Ramble tangent.
Well, so you have become a very effective filmmaker, and your organization, like us, is dedicated to trying to use storytelling to get at these ideas and these values.
Yeah.
You have a series about the COVID Coverup.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, like that, and that's like this almost irrational obsession I have with the loss of humanity and liberty and speech and health and everything we did to children. Like I could just keep going on about the tragedy of the government response to COVID. But as I dug into it more, I had to become an amateur epidemiologist. This was not on my list of things to do, but we all had to, because over time, sincere people started realizing that the government narrative really didn't make sense. So you're saying that this virus that came from a cave all the way over there, thousands of miles away, broke out in this lab, not in this lab, but in this market in Wuhan. Oh, but there's a lab where they're doing this stuff. Like
it's like the Jon Stewart, like the mask falling off moment of Jon Stewart, cracking jokes with and Stephen Colbert being uncomfortable with what is like. How are you uncomfortable with this joke? Yeah. Like what has broken in your brain that you're uncomfortable with Jon Stewart making this joke? And he's like, you sound like Ron Johnson. Like it's like he's broken. He's like a broken person.
It became a religious faith. And like Colbert, like I'm old enough to remember when he was funny. And now he's like a flack for
the medical industrial complex, basically.
Yeah. I was like, how did that happen? I mean, I have theories about that, but so you're dealing with all of this. None of it even makes any sense. Like, first of all, you learned how leaky the constitutional protections that we thought were sacrosanct are. Like, suddenly you're not allowed to say certain things. You're not allowed to leave your house. The government is deciding. By the way, Homeland Security, CISA, some agency I'd never heard of before, in Homeland Security is deciding whether or not you are essential or unessential. So in other words, the government is deciding whether or not you're allowed to work, whether or not you're allowed to leave your house, whether or not you're allowed to do anything. And I'm like, how is this happening? Is this China? So you're digging in, you're digging, and I'm focused on economic arguments, but I got to know Jay Bhattacharya. He's amazing.
Yeah, he's great.
And by the way, if there's a Venn diagram of successful, credible epidemiologists published, celebrated, at least before COVID, and Hayekian economists with PhDs from Stanford, the Venn diagram is one guy.
Yeah.
And it's Jay. And I think that's probably part of the reason he was able to sort of see the forest for the trees on some of this stuff, because he was thinking about the economic consequences. But when I was interviewing him on my show, he sort of casually said, yeah, there was an explosion of funding after 9/11. And I dug into it a little bit more, and I asked him a little bit more, and he said, yeah, the Fauci's power and his money came right after the anthrax attacks, which was part of the panic.
Really?
Yeah. And
I haven't heard this. No.
Okay. So this is the rabbit hole this entire series goes down, because I think, it's not enough to say this was an economic catastrophe and you destroyed a lot of lives. It's not enough to say shutting down schools and making kids wear masks is catastrophic for their development, and we don't even know how bad that's going to be. It's not enough to point out that a lot of people committed suicide. Maybe I think vaccine damage is a real thing. I think we don't know exactly how that's going to play out. But none of that is as dangerous as what I think I'm uncovering. And it basically, have you ever seen Stranger Things?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. If people listening haven't heard this, I'm going to spoil it a little bit for you. Terry and I were late to it, but we're watching it somewhere during lockdown. I already talked to Jay, and he had this kernel in my mind. Stranger Things is a science fiction about a shady government agency, military industrial complex type agency, doing weird, crazy, dangerous science experiments, ostensibly to stop the Soviets. And in the middle of this,
right,
they accidentally unleash hell on Earth. Does that sound familiar at all? And so like the Coverup, there's actually an explicit Stranger Themes vibe to it. It's part sci-fi, it's part whodunit. We're trying to make very dense, complex material engaging for people. We dig a little bit deeper into the origins of this huge boom in gain-of-function research financing, controlled by Fauci, empowered by and some of this is slightly speculative, but not really, empowered by Dick Cheney. So the neocons, Republicans, had this idea that they needed a bioterrorism strategy. One of our worst enemies is going to create a super virus and attack us with it.
And
okay. Yeah.
There's a reason. I mean, it's not unreasonable to want to be able to defend against that. That makes sense.
It makes sense, and it's something that I hope the good, smart people in government, if there are good, smart people in government, are thinking about.
Some of them sneak through and survive.
But you end up with, to quote Hayek again, you have a knowledge problem. You have this arrogant scientism, but you also have an incentive problem. So Anthony Fauci somehow raises his hand and says, I got an idea. What if we, think about how absurd this is. What if we map out all the potential pathogens? We're going to go into the bat caves. We're going to harvest these things. We're going to take them to labs. We're going to then manipulate them, weaponize them with gain-of-function research to see if just how dangerous we can make them. And then we're going to come up with a solution. But we're going to map it all out, and we're going to do this in labs. They were doing it in the United States labs. And so many scientists freaked out. They're like, this could be a world-ending episode if you guys make a mistake. So there was some sort of pause. It wasn't a ban, but during the Obama administration, there was a pause on gain-of-function research. It wasn't nearly stringent enough, but Fauci found a way, consummate apparatchik that he is, well, let's offshore this. Let's take it to places where there aren't such restrictions on this kind of research.
I mean, assuming that is the actual decision-making tree, it's like, oh, well, we'll do this thing that is manifestly very dangerous and requires quintuple level security, safety, like, whatever is done to keep you from falling out of the scariest roller coaster at Six Flags, we're going to do 1,000 times more than that.
Yeah. And,
oh no, let's move it offshore to like dodgy labs in countries that are technically like our adversaries.
Right.
How does that, like,
well, that's
it's like the burning dog. Man, this is fine.
Yeah. That's like the power corrupts part. Like whenever I look at any issue, government failure kind of thing, I look at the knowledge problem, the Hayek problem. They don't know as much as they think they do. And there's a lot of that going on here. But then you look at the incentive problem, that they're going to keep doing it because it's a cash cow. Like there's a whole ecosystem of universities and research labs and nonprofits, NGOs. It's twice as big now as it was before COVID. And they want more money. And are they ever going to sit around and say, you know what, this might not be good for humanity? You wish they would.
It comes back to that Upton Sinclair quote.
Yeah. But so Rand Paul is very much my sort of intellectual partner on this. This project was started through a series of conversations that Terry and I had with him about this. And he's written in a very important book on the subject, sort of documenting exhaustively sort of Fauci's duplicity and makes, I think, a pretty airtight case that Fauci, lied before Congress, and it was, in fact, funding gain-of-function research. I mean, Fauci himself has publicly argued for years in favor of gain-of-function research. He actually said in 1819, there might be a lab leak. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not mischaracterizing. There might be a lab leak, but the cost is worth it. I'm like, yeah. Okay, how do you know that? How do you know that? And then suddenly he's scrambling to silence Jay Bhattacharya. And as you sort of peel back the onion, and this is the point of this series, it's I don't know what the end of the story is yet. I know that this was not a public health operation. This was essentially a military operation, and which explains sort of all the things I was talking about earlier, like lockdowns and the very authoritarian responses. That's not typical public health stuff.
Yeah, this was all fundamentally a kind of martial law action.
Mm-hmm.
We fell into martial law in 2020.
And it was shifted, responsibility within the Biden administration, maybe going back to the Trump administration, responsibility was shifted to DOD, Homeland Security, FBI, probably the CIA, but they never used their own name when they're in these emails. And you could look at the reason you know who's involved is because of Elon Musk and the Twitter files. So we don't know everything about who signed off on gain of function research. We don't know actually who Fauci's boss is. We have some theories, but we don't know. But if you want to look at a good place to dig, look at all of those agencies that were browbeating tech companies into silencing not just Jay Bhattacharya, but any epidemiologist that was saying, this looks like a lab leak. Lockdowns are not good. And they've never been good. And the entire public health literature says don't do that. And you had at a very granular level these alphabet agencies in the military industrial, I'll just call it the military industrial complex, saying, to Facebook, to Google, to Twitter, this guy, like it's just a guy, right? It's not just Jay Bhattacharya, but this guy just said something. He's got 15 followers. Shut that down. Like, it's so wildly ham-fisted that I think that in itself is kind of a smoking gun. But I think the guy that's going to be most interesting is a guy named Dr. Richard Ebright, based at Rutgers. And as it turns out, Ebright, in a very lonely fight, has been blowing the whistle on the militarization of gain-of-function research going all the way back to 2001. And this is not the first lab leak. This is not the first gain-of-function accident. And they've been doing this stuff, and he's been trying to get people to pay attention to this because, they're, weaponized Ebola.
That is the thing.
And they are, like, this is happening. So this is...
Ebola's fatality rate, that is the nightmare scenario.
Right.
Smallpox, Ebola, there's viruses that go after children. We were kind of lucky in the sense that this disaster had the profile it had of basically being a bad flu that could be very fatal for people that were immune compromised or older, which is horrible. But so is influenza. It was an influenza on steroids. It's a coronavirus. But imagine something else.
Yeah.
You don't want to imagine. It's like World War Z stuff.
Right. I'm with Dr. Ebright. I'm like, we should ban it. It's not. Ebright says that there is no medical benefit to manipulating viruses this way. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that government agents and bureaucrats with perverse incentives and sort of a fatal conceit and arrogance that they can do things that they can't do, I know that they're potential of making a catastrophic mistake. So we should just say no. And I don't think that, it seems like, if I ask somebody like, do you trust a bunch of faceless bureaucrats to not make a mistake? And if they do make a mistake, we're all dead?
There is something inside of bureaucracy that is the cover your ass nature of bureaucracy gives rise to some really heinous stuff, because when you don't have the marketplace in which survival is success, and if you do stupid things or you hurt people too, even accidentally, you go out of business. Like, if you're not protected and you have a product that ends up killing a bunch of people, you will be put out of business. But agencies kill people all the time, and they don't get put out of business because they can't be. And so how do we keep them in check? It's just bureaucracy. And that gives rise to things that can be... one example of where I think things have gotten unfortunate is that prior to the pandemic, I think it was absolutely the case that the Food and Drug Administration was causing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans to die by restricting their access to medicines that were already approved in other countries like in Europe.
Yeah.
Or maybe have risks, but the risks are worth it because you're going to die.
Yeah.
And it was broadly understood that like reforming the FDA actually would result in us getting more medicines faster. And that free marketeers and right of center people were for that. And Trump passed this right to try legislation.
Right.
That's part of that movement. And now this is one of the many things that has been unleashed by the pandemic and the catastrophic policy. It's hard to make that argument anywhere now.
Right.
Because people are like, no, the fact that the vaccines came out quickly in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. But it's like, no, it's supposed to take 2 decades to create a vaccine.
Right.
It's like, no, it actually isn't.
Right.
That wasn't a feature of the pre-COVID time. That was a bug too. And I don't even know how to make you can't make those arguments anymore. There's a lot of ways in which, and I think this is Jordan Peterson has talked about this research into authoritarianism that was done in the aftermath of World War II. And I don't know, I haven't looked at it carefully. I don't know, like, what does it mean to have an authoritarian mindset? Was their model of that correct? But what that work, as I understand it, did is it used these surveys with some sort of profile of what it means to be an authoritarian. And it found a high correlation between authoritarian mindset and being in a region that was exposed to infectious disease. And that makes sense because when we are threatened in life or limb, our fight or flight systems kick in, our thinking fast system kicks in, and we become willing to accept crazy stuff, like the government telling me to put a mask on my 3-year-old, or stay in my house and wash my groceries like an imbecile. And we become like, you better put your mask on your 3-year-old or I'm going to call the cops. We become like monsters.
Yeah. Or I'm going to demand that they deny you healthcare because you didn't do the thing.
Yeah. So Noam Chomsky, so-called anarchist, becomes, yes, we should starve people to death.
Yeah.
We should forbid them from getting work and let them die if they don't want to accept a vaccine that the logic of which also is inconceivable. It's like, okay, wait, let me get this straight. So you're saying the vaccine works perfectly. You got the shot, right? So if I don't get the shot, I'm no risk to you because you got the shot. So why do I need to get it if I don't feel comfortable getting it? Because you got it, so you're fine. Why don't you just leave me alone? Like how did that not? That didn't penetrate a majority of people's minds.
It's a non-religious religious fervor, and I went back. I always got to bring this back to Hayek. I went back and reread The Counter-Revolution of Science. I don't know if you've ever slogged through that book.
I have not, so I'm excited to hear what comes next.
I remembered it. Like I struggled through it when I was younger, and it mystified me a little bit. But it's him building out his critique of scientism as he's struggling to explain to socialists why they don't know nearly enough to do the things that they say they want to do, and he particularly, basically takes a knife to this French aristocrat, Saint-Simon. And at the time, it just felt so un-Hayek, because Hayek's using sort of Twitter-appropriate language for, this guy's an idiot, basically, is what he says. And when I went to reread it, I'm like, okay, I get what's going on here. Because Saint-Simon was this French aristocrat who's considered the father of socialism, even though one of his students actually coined the term. And this is before Marx made socialism an explicitly violent sort of class struggle thing. So Saint-Simon is this scientific technocrat. He has a fetish for the sciences. And he imagines replacing markets and freedom and all that chaos with he calls it a Council of Newton. He's going to build a temple to Sir Isaac Newton, and he's going to seat a panel in that temple of the smartest people, engineers, scientists.
Yes.
Does this sound familiar at all? So the idea was we just need smart people to reorganize things, and we can trust them because they're so much smarter than we are. And that's what they did. And I think we're still in that situation where, we're slaves to the science, and we have to trust the experts. And the experts are the people at the right universities. The experts are the people that the government appoint to tell us how to live our lives. The enemy today is not socialism. The enemy today is this technocratic, scientistic fascism. And it goes all the way back to the Hayekian project. He's like, this is the enemy. It's not Marx, this guy. So it's fascinating to me. And you get to the fatal conceit of this entire project. Science, as you know, is a process of a very humble process of people saying, I don't know nearly as much as I think I do. So I'm going to come up with this hypothesis. I have this theory. I have some data to maybe back up this theory, and I'm going to put it out there in the marketplace of ideas. And all my scientific colleagues are going to tear it apart. They're going to tear me down. They're going to try to destroy my idea. And out of that, Hayek describes this in the Counter-Revolution of Science. Out of that doesn't come objective truth. Out of that comes our best effort to understand objective reality within the limits of our ability to comprehend it.
We're only ever moving towards truth. And it's only ever towards truth within a context, because Newtonian physics is great until you get small enough that it breaks in ways that are so insane that they are just the stuff of science fiction, like quantum entanglement and particles coming in and out of existence and superposition that only reveals itself if it's observed and all that crazy stuff. That it's crazy, except that I think it's like we rely on quantum physics for the manufacture of microchips. So it works, but we barely understand why it works.
Yeah.
And so even within a domain, you can just hit a wall and be like, okay, well, we know this in this context for these sets of circumstances, and that's it. And when we try to apply it over here, it all breaks and we don't know why.
So when you say the science is settled, you are making a statement of faith. And you're also making a statement of piousness that will not be challenged. I actually I love my little artifact. I have a Fauci prayer candle in my studio to remind me.
Wait, someone actually made this?
Yes, you can go on Amazon right now. Get one while you can, before Fauci goes to jail. But he became this quasi-religious figure, and I think that piousness is what empowered people to start doing really horrific things to their neighbors. And thank God it didn't go as bad as it could. Like I'm a student of the Cultural Revolution in China, where people turned into animals, and we didn't quite get there, but you see where
some of us did.
Yeah. So you see where this can go when you do this. So it's a combination of these two things that we need to tackle. Like you can't trust people with that much power. But honestly, if you found angels who were really the smartest people in the room, they don't know enough to do these wild experiments, which could potentially cost your family their lives. Seems like a reasonable benchmark, but we're still sort of stuck into this science fetish. Like we're gonna hand over, like when we're scared, right?
Yes.
When we're fearful and they tell us that this is, we had all these scare numbers that told us it was going to be like, 5-10% of the population. By the way, they've been doing this every pandemic as long as the pandemic industrial complex has been around. And the reason Jay Bhattacharya started questioning the numbers very early on is that he went through this with the swine flu. There was a whole hype about that.
Swine flu, bird flu, these all.
And you can look at, the World Health Organization is giving you these catastrophic numbers about how many people are going to die, and they're gearing up, and the money's flowing, and the NGOs are doing their thing, and they're ready, and then it's just a flu. And he ran the numbers on that one. So very early on, he ran it's called the Santa Clara study. And he discovered, and maybe you talked about
We talked about this. Yeah. I mean, he wasn't the only one at the time to do that, to basically notice very early that substantial amounts of the population, if you randomly sampled people at a college campus, or in Germany, they did similar things. 5-10% of the population already has antibodies to this, which means it's been out there, which means that the fatality rate, we're being told, which at the time was something like 3%, which would be horrendous.
Yeah.
It's more like 0.03%.
Yeah.
Because instead of 100 as the denominator, it's 10,000. So
Jay convinced John Ioannidis to come on my show and talk about this again. Like, I've had to become an amateur epidemiologist, way outside of my field of comfort or expertise. But I do think, like, you had really smart people like those two guys, Scott Atlas, all happened to be at Stanford, Ebright, but there's a whole army of demonized epidemiologists, but there's a much bigger army of just smart guys on the internet. Have you heard of this group called Drastic?
No.
It's a hashtag Drastic, and I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically an army of citizen sleuths who have plenty of expertise in their professional lives, who start digging through the internet to find documents. And as it turns out, unlike the Church Commission, where the CIA literally burned the documents so the church couldn't find out what they were up to, it turns out the internet's forever. And so you have all these amateur sleuths who are very responsible for driving this narrative and exposing Fauci. So you have the guys on the inside who are in a lot of ways more effectively gagged and stifled. But you can't stop free people, and you can't censor everybody. And to me, that's a fascinating anecdote to this sort of this scientism and centralization of power and knowledge and science. There's the reason they won't succeed is that there is a decentralized world of people who know better and are willing to do the work.
We are in this moment right now where the trust has been destroyed repeatedly in the things that we have been told and raised to believe were earned hierarchies of authority. That, it's really important that this person went to Harvard and Princeton and Yale. These aren't like utterly captured fifth columns run by crazy people and grifters and basically just hedge funds that pretend to do something on the side, like educate, which is what they are. These are the elite filtered through a process to give us the best and brightest. And we see that to be a scam. That's not true.
Yeah.
These places suck. They're horrible.
Yeah.
They're run by lunatics. They raise our kids to be broken in their minds. The media, in the corporate media, the sort of big media, are manifestly liars that carry water for power. So institution after institution, we have been systemically lied to repeatedly, mockingly, belittlingly. That leaves us in a scary place because even though, yes, we have the internet's also centralized more than ever. We rely on these platforms that aren't actually the open internet. They are individual mass privately held servers. I got nothing against being privately held, but power corrupts in all forms.
They can flip the switch.
Parler got shut down, all that stuff.
Right.
How do you think about where we head next from where we are right now at almost like the anthropological or historical scale? How do you think about where we are in this moment?
So I have to quote one of my favorite philosophers, who was the lyricist for the Grateful Dead, a guy named John Perry Barlow. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He became sort of a technology romantic. He wrote something called the Declaration of Internet Freedom, and it was like a riff on the Declaration of Independence. Very romantic about the potential of all of that. And all the way back then, he was saying like all of these tools, and he didn't know what AI was yet, probably, but all of these tools are incredibly liberating technology, social media, decentralization, democratization, shifting power back to the end user. You could be quite utopian about this. Like this could be a big, beautiful thing where, we can do a lot of self-governance, and you don't need to go to university to learn what to think. You can create your own curriculum, and it doesn't matter. He had this beautiful thing, and it's like, it doesn't matter if you're in Manhattan or Mali, you now have access to the extent of your abilities and your ambitions to teach yourself anything.
Yeah. That aspect is truly amazing.
And then he said, but these same tools can be weaponized against us by government. And you have this entire, we were talking about the machine before. I barely even comprehend what that is, but I know it's collusion between corporations and power mongers, and the media is part of that. They're all captured. So you have this blob of powerful interests. And as someone that sort of had this blind faith in markets, and I'll pick on pharmaceutical companies just for a second here. I thought that we basically had a market, and that we basically had companies that were focused on medical innovations. I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor, so I am the beneficiary of a chemotherapy drug, 20 years cured. So
You're looking great.
I'm probably okay. But like, I had this blind faith that we had a system where innovations would prolong our lives and bring new products to market. I got very red-pilled and maybe black-pilled when I looked at the collusion between pharmaceutical companies and government agencies, not just the NIH, to the point where our government has as majority intellectual property interests in the vaccines that they force people to take. I'm like, so is this a private company? Is this a politically captured company? Is it regulatory capture? Or are they actually in the same building? And do we even trust anything about this process anymore? But to me, it's a microcosm of this bigger thing, because you could talk about endless wars. You could talk about crony capitalism. You could talk about big pharma have their entire business model is getting the government to force you to take a product that you don't want.
Obamacare in a lot of ways really broke the dam on this by asserting something that had never been asserted before, is my understanding, which is the government mandating that every citizen purchase a particular product, which was health insurance.
Yeah.
You must by law now take it, and we will tax you if you don't buy this product.
So you have, like, going back to Jimmy Dore, like the rhetoric about corporations and oligarchs starts to make some sense to me now, because the oligarchs aren't the Charles Kochs of the world who are trying to make a better product and make a profit doing it. They're people that basically sit at the World Economic Forum or some other crazy place and say, we're the puppet masters, and we're going to make sure that the monetary system and the financial system and the healthcare system, that it takes care of us. When we take away your carbon that you heat your home with, and if you're lucky enough, travel on a plane with, we're still going to have our planes. So you see this blob of interest that appears to be getting more powerful. But I think the reason I'll be hopefully optimistic at some point. I think the reason that they look so scary is because they're scared. And you just have to look at the censorship industrial complex. Think about how ham-fisted it is. Some poor dude at the FBI is going through Bob's tweets and saying, he can't say that. Get Facebook on the phone. Mixing my companies. Get Twitter on the phone. We got to shut down Bob.
It's true.
He's a bad man. And
they're like cornered animals. So a cornered animal is going to act even more vicious and crazy than one that's able to maneuver freely and has a lot of room to move.
Yeah. I mean, they used to just like buy the reporter at the New York Times. Hey, write some great stories about the Soviet Union. Oh, it's great. Okay. Done. Checked. Box.
Yeah. And that's a statement of fact, what you just said. That's not a conjecture. That happened.
And they used to do that, and they are still trying to do that, but they do it different ways. And I think the way that they control, I guess we call it corporate media now, legacy media, whatever that thing is. So much of that, between actual government money, advertising, or pharmaceutical money, it's like a huge percentage of their budget. And so they can't bite the hand of their master. So there's this basic public choice story about this, but I think that the delegitimization of all that is a very healthy thing. It is a scary thing. I can see how it would go south, but we have to appreciate that we're in the middle of this. We're talking about the Tea Party earlier. We're in the middle of this paradigm shift, and the first step is to take the red pill. Do you want to see how the world actually works?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out all those authorities, Walter Cronkite, that senator that you thought was such a good man, it turns out that it's all a lie. And that disrupts everything. It freaks people out. They're scrambling to figure out how to figure things out. But at the same time, we're building these informal structures of cooperating, right?
Yeah. One of your fellow GMU alums, Pete Betke, says, we are always in a 3-horse race between 3 S's, and in true econ nerd fashion. Smith, which is to say division of labor and specialization and trade. Schumpeter, which is to say innovation and creative destruction and coming up with new things and breaking and disrupting the old ways of doing things. And stupid, which is government and crooks and liars and cronies and central planners and all the people that think they're smarter than they actually are. And so long as Smith and Schumpeter can outrun stupid, we continue to make progress. And despite all of the brokenness and the corruption, our world is actually still getting better. And we should not lose sight of that. But stupid can do a lot of damage.
We're in anxious times. By the way, I don't know if you know this story, but Pete and I went to college together, and I was not an economics major, but he and I got into a very beer-soaked argument one night, and I had discovered all of these ideas reading the liner notes on a Rush album dedicated to the genius of Ayn Rand. And then I found Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand says, read Ludwig von Mises. My dad randomly is transferred to Grove City, Pennsylvania. I don't want to go to college, but dads win these fights. Went to college as a biology major, hated it, not doing well. Get in a drunken argument with Pete because we're dorks. And there were no girls around. So let's argue about the proper role of government. And I started quoting like Mises and Hayek, and he's like, why aren't you studying economics here? I'm like, why would I? Do you know that the chairman of the department is a student of Ludwig von Mises? I had no idea. How would you know back then? Like information and knowledge was so sticky. Like you stumble across these things. And so he's the reason I'm here, because he's like, dude, you got to change your major and do this. And I followed him to George Mason University, and my entire shady career has been influenced by that.
I ask this question of every guest. We call this show Dad Saves America because I really believe that it is a role that we inhabit that lays a foundation for a free society, that it's actually where our agency as individuals and the choices we make plays out in the lives of our kids and creates that foundation for human flourishing, not just in the family, but in the society, through the community, through all the interactions they will go on to have. How do you think about your role in the American story?
I think that what I've tried to do as someone that started off as a wannabe academic, and I was pretty good at writing when I was younger, and I sort of went on this path where I'm like, I write these academic articles, and 3 people read them, and I got really great notes from people I respect. And then I write my first Wall Street Journal op-ed, and I started doing the math. If I could get it down to 800 words, I can actually reach thousands of people, maybe even hundreds of thousands. And then continuing to pursue that, like, I think my role is to try to translate these values we love so much into some simple language, even a story that might turn on people that are struggling with the same questions that we have. Because I really believe in the wisdom of crowds. Like, I don't think experts are going to save us. I don't believe that people are too unsophisticated to get these ideas. I mean, your mom taught you these ideas, right?
That's right.
Don't hurt people and don't take your stuff. Stop hitting your brother. Don't take his food.
Yeah.
So I think it is common sense. I realize that not everybody's a libertarian, but there's that libertarian instinct in people that I don't want to tell anyone what to think, but I want to turn them on if I could. So that's what I hope I'm doing. And we'll see.
Thanks for being on Dad Saves America, Matt. This was a ton of fun.
It was so much fun. Thank you.